Hi, Adrian. Let me make you a co-host.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. Holland. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. We really
Good.
appreciate your joining us tonight. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Commissioner Goslin, thank you so much for coming. I just sent an email to you that was very late.
You're very welcome. I get things stuck in my spam catcher too.
I think I wrote the email to you at like 2 when I was talking to Lisa, and then I just got the computer and I said, "Oh my God, it's still there."
Yeah. Well, these issues are a huge concern to us in my district too. So I'm really pleased you're pushing these issues. So
Thank you so much for being here. Um, you know, I'm happy that we're able to do it and that people are here and participating. And we have Tawana Holland from DHS here, and some of her colleagues are going to join as well. So
okay, good. I'm gonna take myself
yeah,
off.
please. Yeah. Thank you. I didn't mean to call you out before even 7, but I had felt bad about that. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Hi, David. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you. Oh, yeah. Good to see you. The face with the voice and the emails.
Hey, Courtney.
Hi, Mitch. How are you?
All right. It seems that I logged in from the note that was on the ANC website, but it identifies me as ANC as opposed to Mitch Bear.
Oh,
I don't understand why that's doing it, but I used the link that was in the announcement.
hmm. I don't
So-
think I'm a host. I'm now not a host anymore, so.
You are a host, or it
Oh,
should
am
be
I still a
official.
host? Oh, good. Okay. I don't want to
And,
lose. I don't want to lose my superpowers.
Well, yeah, and she's, who am I to try to
Oh,
even-
that's all I got, you know? I got 3 kids. I'm definitely not in charge.
Okay, so now it says on mine, now Adrian, here's where you need to help us. It says Courtney is currently host, reclaiming host may disrupt breakout rooms, polls, and screen share. So should I say stay co-host as opposed to reclaim host?
Adrian, that's a question for you and not me. I think you should just leave it as is, because if we're right
Right.
now still all co-hosting, that's good.
I
Okay,
didn't
I'm gonna
realize
say-
I was muted. Yeah, it shouldn't. Well, all the things it's listing that it could interrupt are irrelevant to us, but you are also a co-host, which is what you should be, so that's fine. You should just leave it as is.
Okay, I'll stay co-host. Okay.
Thanks for checking.
And I'm doing what you asked me to now, Courtney.
Thank you. I tried to do it. I can't figure it out.
I almost did it without saying anything, and I was like, let me just not touch things. Oh, Adrian.
So we're gonna start in a couple minutes. We're gonna give everyone till 7.
Courtney, I went to the post office today and got our mail.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and you got some letters.
Oh, really? It's exciting.
So at some point in the next couple of days, I want to bring you your mail.
Excellent. Happy to receive it. Fan mail, I'm sure.
Well, it's actually from some students at Alice Steele Middle School.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. That's great. I might make sure I write back.
Well, I'll tell you this whole story when we talk later, and I bring you this stuff. You got 34 people on now.
Want to find, make sure we have commissioners. I see Commissioner Hewitt, Iglesias, Bear.
We're up to 40 people.
I don't see, I'm looking for Marilyn, Commissioner Slatnick, and Commissioner David. Hey, Terry.
Terry, I think you're on mute.
Heidi ho.
Good
Thanks.
evening.
Good evening.
It's just trying to wait here. I do know it's 7:01, everyone, so I don't want to start late, but I was just waiting on Commissioners Slatnick and David. But as we do have a quorum, we will start so that we can be efficient with everyone's time. I want to welcome everyone to this special meeting of ANC3F. In particular, I want to thank members of ANC3G and ANC3C, and in particular, Lisa Gore, Chair, and Janelle Pagatz, Chair, for working here in partnership with ANC3F. So the first thing I'd like to let everyone know, you were here, so you may know already that ANC's 3C, 3F, and 34G requested that the council committees on housing, health, and facilities and family service hold a joint roundtable oversight hearing to discuss the tenant safety issues in the apartment buildings along Connecticut Avenue. We all know, if you're here, you know why we've requested this of council. We did hear back from Councilwoman Henderson that she is working on scheduling that. And that brings me to an introduction of Councilmember Matt Fruman, who has been a stalwart on this issue. As many of you know, he testified recently in the Committee on Housing. He is imploring his colleagues to hold this joint oversight hearing. And we are very, it's really his leadership that's going to make this happen. And, when everybody works together, this is when we help to get things done. But if the solutions were easy, someone would have already solved them. But I want to start by introducing Councilmember Fruman. I'm going to spotlight you here. Thank you very much for being here. And if you want to just start on the oversight hearing request, and then from there, we're going to move to the Department of Human Services. We have their Chief of Staff, David Ross, and they're from the Division of Family Services, Tawana Holland, who will be here to answer questions as well. So, Council Member, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Carlson. Thanks to Chairwoman Lisa Gore and Janelle Pagatz. Yeah, so the request went in for the joint hearing. Christina Henderson was great about it, chimed in to say that it was a thing she hoped to be able to make happen. I chimed in to urge that my colleagues join in organizing this. I do think it's important. I'll just go for a couple of minutes, Courtney, or do you?
That'd be great. That'd be
Okay.
great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so people ask me what's the hardest thing in my job, and my job, I love my job, and I love the hard parts too. But my answer to what's the hardest part of my job is this set of issues. It's not exclusively on Connecticut Avenue, but that's the epicenter of it. And the challenge of there's so many different challenges to this, because it's critical that we find housing for people who need housing, and that we provide support for people who need support. And we all share that as a goal. And yet we have programs that are designed to do that aren't succeeding at doing that in the way that I think anyone would hope. And it has ramifications for the beneficiaries of those programs, and it has ramifications for people who live in proximity to where issues arise. It all got driven home so powerfully when, incredibly tragically, we lost 2 children in the last month. And I think everyone in earshot felt like, isn't there something more we could do? And folks are trying to figure out what to do in this space, and I'm certainly a part of that. Today we had a hearing about the psychiatric hospitals, and there was a little bit of recitation of the history of the bad old days, where folks who suffered from mental health issues were warehoused in places that were sources of real misery, and out of that came this move to the least restrictive option, and to the mandate that care that's received be voluntary. And it comes from a really important place, but some of us watch this and see folks who are struggling independently and not receiving or accepting services and are groping for what can we do to try to help these people and avoid adverse impacts on themselves and their neighbors. A different set of issues comes up, or related set of issues comes up around safety for everybody. And one of the things that's out there is this call for an joint oversight hearing. Another is the Secure Apartments for Everyone Act, the SAFE Act that the Office of the Attorney General has put forward to try to figure out ways to promote safety and hold landlords accountable when things are not done that could that would preserve or strengthen safety in the area. And that, I think that legislation will get a hearing, a joint hearing, I expect this fall. I'd encourage people here who have an interest in these issues to come out and testify at that hearing as well. I'm sure there are people here who have focused on some of the economics around the issues in this space, the idea that there was a time, and it still is the case, where the rents for voucher tenants were elevated very significantly, creating a powerful economic incentive to displace one form of affordable housing, rent stabilized apartments with housing voucher tenants. And we want to house voucher tenants, but we don't want to lose our rent stabilized affordable housing stock. We don't want one to cannibalize the other. I have proposed legislation to try to address that. It did receive a hearing. It has yet to receive a markup. And then I'll end by talking about a phenomenon that's been striking to me, because a day doesn't go by where I don't hear about issues around the challenges of safety and serving people with needs up and down Connecticut Avenue. And there is a theme of, is there something we could do in creating a nonprofit or housing a service provider closer to where people are that could make a difference here in improving folks' lives? And that's an idea that I don't know whether some of the other government folks who are here and going to talk might talk about that. But I want to applaud ANC3F, ANC34G, ANC3C for the focus that they're bringing to these issues, for the way in which you're approaching it. And I'd say to Mr. Ross from DHS and Ms. Holland, we recognize how hard this is. We need to work together to find solutions so that we're serving everybody in a way that makes sense. And this meeting tonight, the call for a joint oversight hearing, is all part of that effort to work collaboratively to come up with ways that we can make this better than it has been. And sadly, we find ourselves in a place after the loss of the two children where I don't think there can be anyone out there who thinks, okay, it's all right, we're doing okay. And we all need to suck it up and look at how we can improve this, because it is clear to me, and I think clear to many of the people up and down Connecticut Avenue, that it has to be, we can do this better than. So with that, I'll stop.
And with that, we'll go straight to David Ross from the Department of Human Services, and then council member, if you would stick around and be willing to speak to people's questions and their experiences, that would be great.
100%.
Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Ross, just a moment. Get you.
Thank you. Can you elevate Tyler as a panelist? He will be advancing the slides for Ms. Holland and I.
Adrian, can you do that? Technical guru.
Tyler, oh, there we go. We've got it, I think.
Thank you so much.
So again, thank you all for having us tonight. In speaking with Courtney earlier to prepare for our presentation tonight, one thing that Courtney asked was that we keep our presentation very light, and that's one thing we want to do. We have prepared a slide that's about 15 slides, but we're not going to go through all of them in detail. We just want to make sure we will leave you all with a copy of this and that you have some good information about who the Department of Human Services is, the services we offer, and then we'll take it from there. We wanted to allow a majority of this evening for an exchange and a discussion with the residents. So Tyler, if you can fast forward this, please. So this is just an overview of what's contained in this PowerPoint slide, so we won't spend too much time on it. Next slide, Tyler. The Department of Human Services, a quick overview. Our mission is to provide services that support residents in reaching their sort of plan of self-determination. The main programs that we offer to residents on our Economic Services Administration side revolve around benefits maintenance. And for our family services sides revolve around homeless services, youth services, most recently refugee and migrant services. Next slide, Tyler. You can advance this slide as well. So really quick, our Economic Security Administration ensures that we provide assistance to families and individuals who qualify for public benefits. Those three main public benefits include TANF, which is cash assistance in households for families where there is a minor child present, a biological or legal minor child. Again, our ESA provides the SNAP, formerly known as Food Stamps, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and that is food funds for food nutrition support for families. And then finally, we have medical assistance for residents. Next slide, Tyler. So this is where we begin to delve into our family services side. What you see on the screen are some of our prevention and diversion programs for individuals, families, and youth. When families experience homelessness in the district, our first course of action is to not navigate them to shelter, but what we do is conduct something called a SPDAT assessment, and that helps us determine a level of need for residents. Some residents need our intervention supports, and sometimes that's shelter, sometimes that's our subsidy programs. But sometimes we have found that some customers just need assistance with first, last month deposit, transportation assistance. And so if those are resources we can provide that prevents a family or individual from even entering into the system, we would definitely do that. Next slide. This talks about some of the outreach that we provide throughout the city. So we have a team, a team of employees at the Department of Human Services, and we also work with several nonprofit providers that have routes throughout the city to conduct outreach for our residents who remain unhoused, trying to remind them that we will continuously come around, remind them of any new service offerings we have, and just try to establish rapport and a relationship that leads to trust, that leads to that resident taking our offer and coming into shelter and seeking the next step. We also have if you can just, thank you, Tyler. We also have something called a day service center. There's one on New York Avenue. There's one at our new 801 East Avenue shelter, and we have one at Adams Place Northeast. Day centers are places where unhoused residents can go and grab a meal, take a shower, wash some clothes, and get connected to citywide services and other service providers that know that the day center is somewhere where our unhoused residents sort of stop in on a day-to-day basis. So those centers are spread throughout the city to allow our unhoused residents some place to go to make sure that they can receive those services. Next slide, Tyler. Ms. Holland, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. And so just to continue on, some of our shorter term programs, our transitional housing programs, our rapid rehousing programs, they service individuals, and families, and youth. And so looking at that, with the transitional housing program, those are programs where they have our residents have been identified as someone who needs some type of short-term assistance. Sometimes you have someone that has maybe the head of household that passed away and they need a little short-term assistance. Other times you have all of the adults in the household are no longer attached to the household, and so sometimes they just need a short-term stay. Sometimes you have residents who need a work bed, meaning they go to work and they come back here because unfortunately the income that they have does not afford them the opportunity to be able to rent. With our rapid rehousing programs, we have rapid rehousing for individuals, we have rapid rehousing for families, and those are 12-month subsidy. They are not voucher programs, they're 12-month subsidy. We also have the Collaborative Solution for Communities, CSC, and the SSVF, which is our supportive services for veteran families. Thank you. And so with permanent supportive housing at the Department of Human Services, we administer two types of vouchers. That's the Local Rent Supplement Program, LRSP, or the PSHP Local Subsidy, okay? And so with those, we service just under 10,000 individuals and families. This is a long-term subsidy. They not only have to have a history of homelessness, but they also have to have a disabling condition to come in. These are categorized through our CAP program, our Coordinated Assessment and Housing Program, where people are prioritized. As you all know, there's not enough housing for everyone. And so that group, through the ICH, the Interagency Council on Homelessness, that group does do the prioritization for those that are matched to permanent supportive housing. Now, there are several types of housing that we have. The two mentioned, LRSP and our PSHP local subsidy, those are tenant-based. Okay, tenant-based meaning the unit is attached, the voucher is attached to the person, and they can move throughout the District of Columbia. We also have unit-based sites. And so there are three separate types of unit-based sites. Though the most important thing is those vouchers are attached to the unit. So if a person leaves that unit, the voucher stays with the unit and they no longer have a voucher. Okay. And so there are three different types. There's a scattered site that's in a building, let's say of 100, there are 10 or less that are attached to that building. We have limited site base. That's where there may be 11 to 20 in a larger building. And then we have the site base, which is 100% of the building are our participants. Now, we do have another program called Targeted Affordable Housing. That's a long-term voucher program as well, where the participants will receive an LRSP voucher. They are there because there is a disabling condition that would not allow them to be able to sustain their housing without this voucher. And so they get a quarterly light touch. Sometimes those people end up stepping up to the permanent supportive housing program, but these are all permanent housing subsidies and vouchers. Now, I do want to make something really clear. HCVP vouchers, or as most people know as Section 8, that's a federally funded and administered voucher program for low-income residents. This is not administered through DHS. This is administered directly through DC Housing Authority and does not include case management or supportive services. And so that's really key because the majority of the housing vouchers that our residents have, over 20,000 are with DC Housing Authority. And so, unfortunately, when we have incidents where we hear about deaths in the community, we immediately go and look and say, hey, is this person attached to DHS? And oftentimes, 2 out of 3 times they are not. They are attached to a Section 8 voucher, and that family or individual does not have supportive services attached to their voucher. So I did want to make sure you all understood that the Housing Choice Voucher Section 8 is not connected to Department of Human Services. Next slide. Okay, so when we start thinking about housing focused case management in the District of Columbia at DHS, we incorporated a housing first model in 2010. It's been around for quite some time, came from New York, was brought here by Pathways to Housing in 2008, and then we incorporated that at DHS. Housing first, not housing only. Years ago, you had to meet all kinds of criteria. You had to be clean for a certain amount of time. You couldn't have an eviction. You couldn't have a felony. And that left a lot of people street homeless or overburdening the shelters that we did have. And so we moved to a housing first model, which means housing first, not housing only. It is accompanied with supportive services. Now, you also have to understand that with giving people supportive services, they have the right to say no. Sometimes our most fragile residents say no, and they have the right to say no. But when they want services and they come to us for services, we absolutely provide them intensive case management and supportive services. And so there are 3 phases to our intensive case management. One is our initial intake. In 2022, we began our 3rd rendition of the PSH program, which is our PSH3, Housing Supportive Services. This is where now the country is moving in a different trajectory. And so people understand that housing is healthcare, right? Think about people who are on the street and how fragile their health is versus someone who is housed. And so the country is now moving in a different direction. Housing is healthcare. And so now the DHS is now working with Medicaid and getting reimbursed for the case management services. And so a part of that is a conflict-free assessment that is done with intake. And in that conflict-free assessment, they choose a permanent supportive housing provider to work with, and they choose the goals that they want to work with. Something that has been unprecedented. Most of the times, participants have said during intakes, this is the first time anyone has ever asked me where I want to live, what goals I want to work on, and what provider that I'd like to choose. And so we are very happy to be able to bring this to the District of Columbia. The next phase after that is called housing navigation. That is from assignment through lease up. That should take 120 days. But there are a lot of societal barriers that keep people from being able to lease up that quickly. But it is 120 days. And during that time, they have a minimum of 1 visit per week, a minimum of that. Some people need more, but that is the minimum that they can do until they're leased up. Once they're leased in their unit, and remember the last slide, I said that either it could be a tenant base or a unit base. And so once they're leased in their unit, they have a minimum of 2 contacts, right? Some will get more, some will get the minimum, which is 2 contacts, one in the home face-to-face and one other type. The other type could be a school visit. It could be a meeting with their therapist. It could be attending an NA meeting with them. Any kind of other contact. And so that's why we categorize it as just that. Next slide. And so when we think about all the services that are a part of intensive case management, there are so many things. When they first come into the program, we look at things like their tenant support. So our case managers not only help them find units, keep in mind, many of the residents that are neighbors of yours have been traumatized east of the river. And so oftentimes people choose to live somewhere else. We don't place them. People choose to live in places where they have not experienced trauma. However, many people have not ever had a real tenancy. They have been couch surfing for so many years. They have not ever had this opportunity. So sometimes they have to review their lease. They have to be taught how to be a neighbor. They have to be taught how to make maintenance requests, different things like that. And so that's a part of the intensive case management that happens. Of course, there is goal setting. What kinds of things do they want to work on? Do they want to work on sobriety? Do they want to work on their mental health? Do they want to work on just maintaining their medications and understanding how to track their medications and how to track their medical appointments and attend their medical appointments? Do they need to have help with navigating metro and bus lines? And would they like to live close to schools if they have children? And what kinds of activities and different things are in their neighborhood, grocery stores, all kinds of things like that. So that's a part of the identification of resources. And so not only are there professional resources, but we want to really encourage natural resources. Some natural resources are their neighbors. Some natural resources are their clergy or their children's coaches or their family and friends. We want to always ensure that if there is an issue, that the case manager is contacted and the case manager is there to assist the participant. Now, it has been a struggle through the pandemic because there was a lack of face-to-face. A lot of things were virtual, but that is no longer the case. We are face-to-face in the work that we are doing every day. Okay, this work is 24/7. And so when the case manager is not there, there is someone else at that PSH provider's office that is on call to address concerns. We do collaborate with the Department of Behavioral Health. Many of our individuals, families, and other folks who are in their households do participate with the Department of Human Services, where they have a mental health provider, a community service worker that also work in conjunction with their housing case manager. And so we are consistently having meetings together, whether at the office or in the unit. Many of our clients like to stay anonymous, though. They want to be your neighbor. They want to be in your buildings, a part of the neighborhood, and they don't want to feel like they are singled out. And so sometimes those meetings happen in people's offices instead of coming to their units. Now, those are those other services outside of that. We also do supports to our seniors. We have a growing population. And so oftentimes we are working with DACL to look at those services that seniors need and connect them with the services and connect them with workers that are at DACL as well. And so keeping in mind, as we are looking at all of these different services, it's very important that we are in collaboration with neighbors, ANC commissioners, the landlords, the property managers, to ensure that not only our participants and our residents want to live there, but that they have the capacity to live there and that they want to learn how to be good neighbors. And so we do welcome and thank you all for having us here, because this is a big part of this. This also helps to inform the services that we provide and what are the other things that we need to do. And so with that being said, I will turn it back over to my Chief of Staff, David Ross.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Thank you very much for that very detailed overview of the programs. That's why I switched it to you. I knew I would not do it as great a service as you do. And I just want to wrap up with what Ms. Holland shared, and that the way we approach our work is codified in the HSRA, Homeless Services Reform Act, and that is the law in the district with how we can and cannot serve the unhoused. I just want to make sure you all have that reference point as well. And at this point, Courtney and Ms. Carlson, I think we're ready for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very, a lot of information. I know, I have a lot of questions, but, I actually would just like to go, to the others in the room. And I'll start with, commissioners. Can you stop sharing your screen so I can see, who is here, and if anyone, has a question? Sorry. Commissioner Slatnick.
Can Ms. Howard tell me who contacts the case manager? Once a person becomes our neighbor?
Ms. Holland, sorry, go ahead.
Owen?
And so you want to know which, as you as a neighbor, would you contact, who do you contact? Is that what your question is?
No, you had said that the tenant can contact their case manager. And I want to know, can other persons contact the case manager if there seems to be a gap in service?
So let me just say, our participants have the right to confidentiality, right? And so we cannot just, well, you could contact the landlord. The landlords are privy to the information. They know who is connected to a program or not. And so if there is a concern, the first thing I would say is to let your landlord know, and the landlord could contact the service provider, the PSH provider.
So if I can expand on that, there is a difference between issues and concerns and complaints that warrant case management involvement, but where residents are not living up to their agreement as a resident in your building, loud music at night, yelling in the hallway, those are violations of the lease that we would expect you to contact the landlord. Because again, our housing support is to help the resident learn how to become a neighbor, learn how to live within a lease, learn how to live next to people who might have lived alternate ways. And so we're trying to encourage that relationship. Where you may have had to call 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 times, and that's still an issue, maintaining the privacy that Ms. Holland spoke about, the relationship that we're trying to formulate here is to notify me. And so I would reach out to Ms. Holland and I would say, hey, is there, do you have a relationship with the property manager, or can you help create one with me? I'd like to follow up on why I'm hearing from residents who have made complaints about someone and they're not being followed up from a landlord's perspective. And then where there are opportunities for us to impart case management, that's where I can have that discussion with the appropriate case manager if that resident is a part of our programs. Where that resident is not a part of our programs, what I commit, as I always have, is to reach out within our network. Our systems can confirm whether someone is a DHS customer or not. And then if they are not a DHS customer, there's really only a handful of places I would look: Department of Health, Department of Behavioral Health, and then DC Housing Authority. So I would send an email to those chiefs of staff saying, we have received complaints about this particular unit. Can any of you confirm you have a program participant, not using names, at the address and unit? Did that answer your question, ma'am?
Sorry, I muted myself.
I want to make sure that I answered her question.
Marilyn, yeah.
Yes, you did answer the question. Apparently there is a difference of the, who is the service provider or what kind of program somebody's under. Is that that's the glitch. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it a glitch because of
I do.
confidentiality reasons. We don't publicize how people's rents are paid, right? And so that's why we're first encouraging folks to exercise this is a violation of the lease. And then because we don't want you to have to figure out, well, is this a voucher holder, 1 or 2? And then if they are a voucher holder, what agency do they belong to? We offer that to you as our relationship. Reach out to me, let us do the digging behind the scenes. It's one of our residents. You have my firm commitment that I follow up with the case manager and the leadership manager to make sure there's an issue. And where that resident is not part of our team, I reach out to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Commissioner Hewitt, who's the chair of our 3F Housing Committee, and then to Chair Pagats of 3C, Terry.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the presentation. I understand that an individual who you support has protections as to how their rent is paid. Understand that. But what was said in the presentation is through your interactions with your constituents that they are to rely on their neighbors, their natural resources. When there are so many residents in our neighborhood from varying walks of life who have expressed concern about individuals who are volatile, acting out, expressing anger, causing concern in community. MPD is called, they do what they need to do. 311 requests are put out. There needs to be a step back from your policies and re-look at how you are serving your individuals, your constituents, because it can't be but it can't be, hey, you get a housing, you reach out to your neighbors for your natural resources, reach out to these entities, but yet when the individual is having a crisis, who may not be able to discern if they need services or not. I think we need to have a bigger discussion about how we move forward. That's all I have at the moment for this. There are so many other.
I certainly respect that, and I thank you for that, ma'am. What we follow here in the district, and really is a national model, is housing first, right? Ms. Holland spoke to that. That's in our HSRA, and again, those are the laws that we are following that govern how we serve residents. I'm just okay.
I understand that, but we're constituents, and so your residents are your constituents. But as an ANC, we have constituents, so it does seem like we've come to a juggernaut. And that's why I think there needs to be a re-step, look back at the laws and policies, and maybe we have to bring OANG in and council, because for any relationship, big or small, to work, there needs to be an understanding, the nuance. It cannot be this single partner in the relationship gets to have their way. No matter how badly, if you raise children and they act out and we don't parent, there's a problem in that relationship. When you have residents who just want to raise their kids no differently than the constituents that you support, we don't care how their rent is paid. We don't care anything about their background. We care to be neighborly, but neighborly requires each person to step up to the plate and to be a neighbor. Neighborly does not mean that I'm responsible for your constituents so that I have to be twice, 3 times, 100 times more neighborly so that there is some sort of degree of relativity here, some sort of balance. So there needs to be a bigger conversation. And I understand and respect where you're coming from, but when I hear this presentation, all I hear is I. And that is not a healthy relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Terry. Terry, again, is the chair of the Housing Committee, has been steeped in this issue, has been working hard on this for a very long time. Thank you, Terry. Chair Janelle Pagats, 3C.
Hi, and thank you for your presentation. I thought that was very informative. I happened to listen in on some of the testimony provided by public witnesses at the Housing Committee that Councilmember Robert White held last week. If you could ever, well, I know this process isn't brief, but how does one engage with receiving housing assistance? Because it seems like there's a lot of programs, a lot of streams. People were getting frustrated with getting stuck in systems with like scheduling housing or inspections and stuff like that. And like, I am pretty computer savvy, and I've spent now 4 years as advisory neighborhood commissioner, and I'm pretty savvy now with government bureaucracy. I'm overwhelmed by like that entire thing. So I could see people getting frustrated with like it just being incredibly overwhelming, not knowing who to go to get responses. Like that I would act out too. And also I just want to note that there are plenty of people who pay their rent and mortgage that are bad neighbors too. So I don't think that we should just say it's caused by a group of bad actors, because it's not. So if you guys can answer that.
So thank you for that. A couple of clarifying questions. Do you mean for a resident to understand how to navigate our services, or concerned residents of?
How a resident becomes a customer of yours, and like how they get into the workflow stream of the different programs available, and then like, are they just going to one agency to help continue to navigate that, or is it like multiple, or like how complicated is it?
Thank you so much for that. So it all begins with that SPDAT. And for our families, there is a one-stop entry point, which is our Virginia Williams Family Resource Center located on Rhode Island Avenue. So we tell families, if you are in need of homeless services, if you have questions, if you are behind on your rent, get to or call Virginia Williams Family Resource Center. For an individual who is experiencing homelessness, it is still that SPDAT assessment, but their route of entry are any of our day services centers in the city. So to make it as not complicated as possible, all someone has to do is pick up the phone, either call our shelter hotline number. If they don't know that number, a resident can call 211, be transferred to the shelter hotline, and our shelter will our shelter van will come out anywhere in the district and pick up an individual or families, take them to the nearest shelter or day services center to begin that process of taking the SPDAT, which is again the assessment of the severity of need, the situation for that individual and family, and it helps the team understand what programs, intervention, or support that individual or family may be eligible to receive. Did that clarify, Ms. Padgett? I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name.
Fine. It did. And then how long approximately does this whole thing take between when they apply and when they receive aid? And then I know that there sometimes is a lag between getting like placed where they want to be using the amount of money that they've been qualified for. So what's that time?
And there's no one time for two cases, right? I could have potentially all my identification documents, every relevant document I may need, and the process is super short for me. We have many residents who do not have just basic identification, so that's where their sort of case management begins. Nevertheless, residents apply, are told what they qualify for. And based off of that, there are a set of documents or applications or forms that must be filled out. A misnomer is that we identify units for residents, and we don't do that. We work and support residents picking their own unit, and sometimes that's where the process can be delayed or elongated, right? We want to make sure that residents are able to identify a unit that works for them logistically, family size, household size. But then there is the ever-present rent reasonableness, that we do not have any shape or form in setting or guiding. That's completely a federal process implemented by our partners at the Housing Authority. And I think that just changed this past June or July with very, very little notice of any to providers and residents. So we had a number of residents in the process of waiting for that determination going into it, sort of having an understanding of current rent reasonableness, and then it literally changed over day. And we had many applications that were just kicked out over that overnight process. That tends to be a place where we see some, I don't want to say delay, but some time spent in identifying that right spot and then working with the Housing Authority to get that rent reasonable determination. And then from there, there could be hiccups with scheduling walkthroughs, and then once a unit is identified, it has passed inspection. We just our term is called lease up, where the customer signs a lease and receives their key.
And let me just piggyback on that, what Mr. Ross was also speaking of. Another part of the rent reasonableness is the affordability. The affordability scale is determined through DC Housing Authority. Someone who has a rent reasonable unit, if they have a certain amount of income, it may be attached to that and they can afford that unit. But that same unit, if someone makes less, their affordability may not allow them to rent that unit. And because we're looking at all of that, sometimes there are units that people can afford, and sometimes they're not, they're units that they can't. The other piece of that is oftentimes we'll have landlords that'll have amenities fees, additional utilities fees, holding fees of $500, $1,000. We've even seen one for $1,500. All of these are ways that our participants are held up from being able to move into a unit that they have identified for themselves and their families. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Thank you. That was really helpful to understand that there's a process, and it is a fairly robust process. And that, again, I think reiterating that we're not just, putting people in certain buildings without any of this process is not something that's happening. So I appreciate you explaining that. Thank you.
But if I can just jump onto that, one thing I've heard from several residents I've talked to is that some people get put into housing without, with just a bed. So I was talking to someone who, said they get there and, they don't have a table for their kids to work at. How did those services, and I'm sorry, I just jumped the line of the question, but like, how did those services get folded in to what you're doing? Because there's nonprofits that I think we talked about last time a little bit, and these other city services, but it seems like people are you get housing, that's amazing, but if you get here and your kids can't, don't have a place to do their homework, you don't have the things you need to start a life, that makes starting a life much more difficult.
We have partnerships with, and I'd be interested for you to connect me with these residents. We have partnerships with organizations. One is a Wider Circle, who we connect with, who will provide beds and household furniture and plates.
But then the resident needs to provide the transportation, is what I was told. No? Okay.
The relationship comes with transportation.
Okay.
And I also have a donations and partnerships lead that directly works for me. So where there is a need that our partners can't fulfill, I tap on that person to sort of get creative and find a way to meet that need. So again, I would be interested in meeting and learning more about residents who have an unmet need.
Well, I think that's part of maybe is the communication in terms of, I mean, I'm dizzied by the amount of information provided. Like Janelle was saying, to synthesize some of this and to help, help everybody help connect people with what they need. Like, we'd all love to do that, I think. I mean, I don't want to, it's exactly what I said. I said a wider circle. But then, if you don't know all the pieces of that, I don't know. And I can't imagine that people coming out of homelessness know. So like how how do we best get everyone that information so that we can all like be a village?
So and Ms. Holland can correct me if I start to go wrong, but part of case management, the lease up, we don't just lease people up and walk away, right? And the team has been at this is their field. So that a part of the conversation of helping residents move in is having that discussion about what is what is needed, and making that connections to wider circle. Tawana, do you want to correct me, add on to what I'm saying? But in essence, I think what I'm hearing, Courtney, is how can we do a better job of letting residents know that they don't have to figure this out on their own? And
Well, that, and then, I mean, I think
but our response is though
spirals.
part of the lease up case management, and that the team wouldn't just let someone walk into an empty apartment and just walk away.
That
But I
is,
think then that spirals to the next bit of the issue, which is then you have people who, you know, aren't fit to live independently, who are causing a lot of trouble, both for, you know, and if we have a large number of voucher recipients in a bunch of buildings, so you're not just causing, you know, if you have a person who's not fit to live independently, you're not just causing a problem you're causing a problem for everybody. If you've got 50% voucher recipients in a building, those, you know, there's one bad actor, two bad actors, four bad actors. They're creating problems for other, you know, everybody, no matter how they pay their rent. It's a small amount of people who are creating a large problem. And I want to go to, I'm sorry, well, Chair Gore and Commissioner Gosselin, I don't know, you could duke it out for who gets to go first. I'm not sure what the protocol is.
Peter, you want to go first?
The protocol is that the chair goes first.
I didn't want to pull rank. So first of all, let me just say thank you to my fellow chairs, Courtney and Janelle, for organizing this, and Councilmember Fruman for being here, and David, you and your team for being here as well. ANC3F has been, I'm sure Commissioner Gosselin, who is vice chair of the ANC, will go into, you know, some detail what we have been trying to do on the 3F side. But David, my question to you is more about, I guess, capacity. Some of the things that I've heard in the community make me very concerned about the overall capacity to administer the program. I'm very curious about what your staffing levels are, what the case levels are, particularly in Ward 3. And I know you can't go into specifics, but that's a very general question. Have you guys raised any capacity issues with the council? The presentation was great, and I'm kind of leaning in with Terry. It's great, fantastic. You guys gave us a lot of great information, and you know, on the surface, it would seem that things should be working well, given the structure of the agency and your mandate and the way things are laid out. But when you hear some of the information coming from the community, it's quite clear that things are not working well. And generally, when organizations, particularly governmental entities, don't work well, there's generally a capacity issue. So I'm wondering if we could have like an honest discussion about that, especially with 3 ANC chairs being on this call and a council member, where, because I'm looking at ways, you know, how can we help you all? I think we can, you know, definitely get to some of these issues in a joint oversight roundtable if we get it scheduled. But you have 90 community members on the line. And I think they would really like to hear your perspective on this. I would too. So, and I know that can be a tough question. I come from the federal IG community. I know that can be a tough question for agencies, but you have to be transparent and honest.
No, and I appreciate the question, and I don't think we're dealing with a capacity issue here. I think part of the rub I think I'm hearing is an expectation, and if I'm wrong, I own that case management solves and prevents issues from happening. We know that, as Ms. Holland shared, we follow a housing first model, which says the best way to support someone experiencing homelessness is to get somewhere dignified, safe, and reoccurring for them to sleep at night. Once that happens, vis-a-vis our supporting customers and leasing up to a unit, that's when the real case management, that's when the real works at the issues that some of our residents feel begin. So like obtaining the unit does not solve someone's substance abuse issue, will not solve someone's behavioral health issue, but it gives them a stable platform for moving forward. Residents connected to case management services, even if they were engaged daily, weekly, that does not prevent things from happening overnight, right? And I think that's some of it. To some extent, we're here to talk about when some bad actors, regardless of how their rents are paid, because not all of our residents who we help support moving them into units are acting in this way. You know, Ms. Holland said that her program supports over 10,000 residents, and we're here to talk about 100, I think, or so, if not less. And so while I do not mean to belittle the issue, it's not that the program is not working. I think you, the residents on this call, are expressing to us that we are living with a number of your residents and we'd like to see some change. And that's what we're here to talk about. I wouldn't say the program is not successful, and I don't think it's a capacity issue. I think we're here to really figure out how do we support our residents, understanding they have a legal right to accept or reject our case management, but continuously want to support them and find ways and listening to the community to support them.
Well, I say that because on the last meeting that we had a young lady, and I don't know if she's on, who seemed to be in a position where she wanted to accept case management, and she had accepted case management, but she's never seen her case manager. I've talked to management agents, owners of buildings that have alluded to the same thing. I would be highly surprised in a housing program that's offering, you know, wraparound services is if capacity has not played a role in what we're seeing. And I get really concerned when I hear people in the community say, well, I'm trying to get my services, but I never seen. I don't know who my case manager is. That stems from something different. So I don't think that's really been addressed, but I don't want to belabor that. That's where I'm coming from at looking at this. But when you do have somebody, and this will be my last question, that is receiving services and they are extremely problematic to the community, can you tell us if there is a mechanism to alter their housing arrangement? Do you all have a determination of, say, somebody that is not successful in that model? And that goes back to, and I'm very familiar with the housing first model. Is it working? I would love to hear Councilmember Fruman's opinion on that. But I mean, in terms of someone that is living in an apartment on Connecticut Avenue that is not living there successfully and is causing a lot of issues with the community in terms of public safety, do you all have a mechanism to change their living arrangements? How does that work?
So I'll let Ms. Holland speak to emergency transfers in a moment, but I just want to go back to something because Ms. Courtney and I talked about this. Courtney referenced this resident and what she mentioned at the last meeting, and that I would go back to, not every voucher holder is a DHS voucher holder or even a district voucher holder.
Right.
If they are a holder of the federal voucher, you're right, Ms. Gore, they will not have services through an identified agency or through an agency that gave them their voucher. But as a district resident, they can call and we can give them that service. So as opposed to sort of finding out, again, what programs people are referred to, I would ask that I get that email, because again, if that person is a part of our program, sort of I take that email to say, this is what's going on. I need you all to focus on follow up with the resident, figure out what is going on. We're hearing from our community partners and what can we be doing differently that perhaps we have not offered them. But as of right now, I could not go into those what ifs without knowing the specific cases, because again, and again, it's a government agent saying that, and if I could show you my emails, I would. But 8 times out of 10, the complaints we get, the resident isn't even part of our program, but we can't even tell you that, right? Because of confidentiality. And sometimes that assumption that what is DHS doing with these residents, I want to be the first one to say they're not ours. Maybe that would change the nature of our relationship, but I can't even do that for them. Ms. Holland, can you talk a little bit about emergency transfers?
So with our homeless programs, the transitional programs and our rapid rehousing, they have the mechanism, and our shelters have the mechanism to do emergency transfers. When they're in permanent supportive housing, they have a lease in their name, right? And so doing an emergency transfer is very different. And so if we're talking about someone who is having an acute manic issue, mental health issue, contacting 911, contacting mobile crisis, those would be mechanisms that you would take so that person can get services for the safety issue right there. So for example, if someone is having a medical emergency, or someone is acting out, maybe they're in the hallway brandishing a knife, you would call 911 for that, right? Let's say someone is running up and down the hallway naked, screaming and knocking on people's doors. You may call the mobile crisis center, and they may be FD12 and put into a psychiatric hold so they can do a further evaluation. That lease is still in their name, right? Sometimes what happens is you will make that call, a neighbor will make that call, and by the time that crisis mobile staff gets there to do an assessment, the person has calmed down. And so they don't see them as an imminent danger or threat. And so they go back into their unit, they talk to them. And then here you have 10 minutes later, after the person leaves, this is a reoccurring situation. And so we do have those kinds of situations, and we do address those on an ongoing basis and really try to provide those services. One thing that Mr. Ross has said, that I have said, that folks have the right to decide that they want to continue with services or they don't want to continue with services. When it becomes a safety issue, your first line of defense is calling MPD, right? If it's a nuisance call, someone doing something, standing outside, maybe urinating outside, maybe just standing outside staring at people, we have that as well. Those will be calls that you may make to the crisis mobile. But if you see someone that is violating the lease, maybe there is a noise issue, maybe you hear a lot of arguing or whatever, contact the landlord. The landlord also has, for those who we are engaged with, they also have the direct connect to the permanent supportive housing provider that is attached to that person.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Commissioner Goslin, you've been outranked again here because Councilmember Fruman also has his hand up. So, I mean, you do duke it out. Councilmember Fruman, sorry, I can't even let you duke it out.
I apologize, Peter. So thank you very much. I got to tell you that I am actually somewhat frustrated by this, because part of the way I started was to say, I think everybody recognizes that there are challenges here, but I'm not hearing that from DHS. And there's a suggestion, call 911. Do you have any idea how many times 911 has been called? How many police visits there have been to the apartment buildings up and down Connecticut Avenue over recent years? It's enormous. When you talk to MPD says, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing. We're spending an enormous amount of our time responding to things in these buildings. And I hear you, you don't know exactly who's doing it, but what we do know when we look at the data is that most of the new voucher tenants up and down Connecticut Avenue are permanent supportive housing vouchers. It's on your dashboard. We can look at it. And so there is a need for you guys to try to do more to support this and to recognize, don't downplay the concerns that people have. I get it every day. I have people whose lives have been threatened, and they're trying to get something done. And part of the question that Commissioner Gore was asking is, well, when you become aware of this, is there anything you can do? And the answer was no. And it may be that you can say, oh, the law doesn't let us, but so our hands are tied. But there's a challenge here that is real. And the people who are raising the challenge are not being xenophobic. It's not their fault. They are dealing with difficult situations. And I really wish that everybody inside of the administration would come to grips with that and try to work with us to figure out how to do it. There's also the thing, Director Pettigrew from DCHA testified last week about some of the challenges of getting people into apartments and talked about, and DCHA processes the vouchers that you guys work with, and they have hired lots of locators. That was his expression, which was to connect people to landlords and units. And so you get into a semantics thing that isn't, in my opinion, isn't helpful. These are real issues, and we ought to be trying to address it. I'm going to ask you to go to slide 10, if you would, from your presentation.
Do you want us to pull it back on the screen?
Please do.
Kelly,
Please
can you pull up slide 10, please? So as he's doing that, council member, I do want to just push back a little respectfully in that we no one on this call is not taking the concerns of the residents seriously. And I thought I said this a couple of times, that our hands are tied and that the way we are working with residents is fully compliant with the law, the Homeless Services Reform Act. So what we can't do, sir, is remove people or remove them from one apartment and just place them somewhere else because they are being a nuisance. While I understand that, then we'd be breaking the law, sir. And so what we are attempting to do is to be good neighbors within the rule of the law, which is what we have to operate with.
But this is where I want you to be saying, we understand this is a real challenge and we would like to be able to do something. We would like to have a broader spectrum of services that we can provide, because this is an issue that's real and that should be addressed. You can tell me we don't feel like we can do it under the current circumstances, but work with us to figure out how it is that we get to where we're fully serving people and not having situations where one neighbor is feeling very threatened by another neighbor and it's not a figment of their imagination. Because the most exasperating thing that can happen is people who raise a very serious issue, including about their own safety, and they get treated as if they're a snowflake, and they're not a snowflake. They're being threatened. So if you can pull up slide 10, because it piqued my interest about something else, and I'm sorry to be taking as much of the time here, but I just felt like I needed to sound off.
Tyler, do you have slide 10 pulled up, please?
Time is yours.
Tyler, are you still with us?
All right, well, slide 10, we don't have to go to
No,
it.
I can pull it up.
No, I'm still here. You want me to pull up the slide deck? Do you know what slide number?
Slide 10,
Yeah.
please.
Slide 10.
Okay, we'll do.
So the thing that struck me was, you have and this is going to be another place where the law, you part of your answer will be, the law just doesn't allow it. But I just want to focus on, so there's the scattered site model where it's under 10 units in a building. And the way you described it was, you might have a 100-unit building and 10 of the units are designated for tenants with permanent supportive housing needs. And then the limited based model, which it's 11 units or more, but you describe that, Ms. Holland, as being in a big building and there might be 11 to 20. And then there's the site-based model, which is 100%, but presumably has lots of services associated with the building. And so it's when I heard this, I thought, okay, your goal is either a building that's 100% but rich with services, or a small portion of the building being used to serve people with high needs, and then you have folks who are helping. But the tenant-based model, I don't think has it. It ends up being 50% people with very high needs, but not services on site. So the tenant-based model, it feels like, gets you to a place where when you have control over it, you get to someplace very different than the situation where you have buildings that are half full with people with very high needs and not services on site. And am I garbling that badly? Because that's how I interpreted that portion of the presentation.
So let me speak to that. So, so what you're speaking of are two separate types of programming, right? The tenant-based are the ones where the vouchers attached to the tenant, and that tenant signs a lease. That tenant can move from place to place. They choose, right? They choose where they want to stay. Even in the unit base, they choose if they want to stay in that unit, but we preference that by saying the voucher is attached to that unit. It is not attached to the person in that building. But in our entire program of nearly 10,000, the unit-based sites, which is the scattered, limited, and site-based, only take up about 12%. So most people in the community have a tenant-based voucher, and they are afforded the same opportunity to have the intensive case management. Now, I can't tell you that every single one is consistently engaged every time that they want to. That is a part of the consistency that their case manager has in building a rapport and working with them and working with their clinical supervisor to try different intervention strategies to continue to work with them. It is a difference from our full site-based unit-based where you have 100% of our participants there. There are services that are right there on site, but with our tenant base and some of the smaller ones, they have services as well. You may not see those services because most of those participants want to stay anonymous. They want to be among their neighbors and be treated just like their neighbors, even when sometimes they have challenges, which, as Mr. Ross said, it's unfortunate, but many of the residents that have vouchers do not have case management attached to them. And that's because they are coming from a Section 8 voucher and they are coming directly through DC Housing Authority without the case management. But all of those that are attached to our programs, the nearly 10,000, they do have intensive case management services, but it is still their right to refuse them or accept those services. And it is up to us to work even harder to engage them and get them in wanting to receive services. And so it is a challenge. It is something, I think that's the reason why we're really here. We want to hear what the concerns are. We want to list. It's not that we can share with you what's happening with those folks, but we want to know who they are so we can really see, are those people connected to our programs and how we can continue to assist those families even more than we are now.
So I hear you, but I'll finish by saying, expressing frustration, and at every turn it's going to be the law. And one, I don't think you want a world where it's 50% of a building is people on permanent supportive housing and there isn't on-site services. I hope you don't want that. And I do think that's a world that we're getting to. Two, and it's the law, there's no filter going in. Then services are voluntary. Then, if there are serious issues that arise, including threats against other tenants, it's not your problem, it's somebody else's problem. And maybe that's how it all works, but you can imagine for the people who are living in buildings where there are people screaming in the middle of the night, where there are obvious drug rings happening, where there's obvious prostitution happening, where people are being threatened, that they're not satisfied with this. They feel like this isn't working the way we hope anybody wants it to work. Now, I say all that, but I also completely share your view. And somebody was saying, you know, it's a small number of people who are the source of some of these issues. This is an enormously important program that helps people get up on their feet, and for the vast majority of folks is successful. But where it's not working, we all gotta admit it's not working and try to figure out how to make it work for those people and the people around them. And I wish I heard more of a sense from you that that's what you're trying to do. But I'm afraid it isn't what I've been. That's not the tenor that I've heard tonight. So with that, I'll get out of the way and let others speak.
I kind of want to ask a question. So I'm new here. My name is Tyler Edge. I'm the special assistant to David Ross. And you know, I've just been listening and taking all this in. And I do have I just want to you know, create an ear to think. So let's say we do have a tenant, not DHS, a tenant in a building in general that is causing distress, or you know, threatening you, but they live there, they are renting there. What steps do you usually take in those regards? Um, and that's kind of, you know, where I wanted to go with that. Like I'm trying to get
Yeah,
us to
this
yeah.
is where you again, you know, everybody can point their fingers in a different way. What you would do is you would pursue an eviction process in that setting, and the eviction system is broken, and so that becomes very, very difficult to do. And I don't want to be the guy who's for eviction, but I'm also don't want to be the guy who says it's all right when somebody in a building is threatening a 70-year-old woman who lives in that building. And we're not able to address that. It's not working to address that. And so the fact that folks out there are frustrated about this, you can say, oh, it's not, you know, that's not my problem. I'm not the court system. And you're not. But we're part of a whole system that has created serious issues. And I just wish I always had the sense that folks were thinking, yeah, there's real issues here. How do we fix it? Not it's somebody else's problem or there's nothing I can do. And
So respectfully, council member, none of my colleagues and I have joined this call to say it's none of our responsibility. What we're trying to do is figure out within the law that we have to follow, what can we do? What could we be doing differently? Ms. Holland shared that when customers choose to opt out of case management, which is their right, we don't stop. We continue to call and we continue to reiterate how case management supports. But sir, that is the extent we can do under the law. We cannot make people take advantage of case management where they choose not to, and we cannot kick them out of a program that allows them by law to opt out of case management. So we are here to hear what we can do, hear more from the community about specific issues. And other than that, we are here to be open to what we can do within the limits of the law, sir.
all right, so I've used up way too much of the time. Let's let the folks from the community.
Commissioner Goslin, it is your turn.
Could you take down the slide? Thank you. Let me try to pursue two questions. Let me just set the stage for the first by saying, assume I'm a tenant, going rate tenant in an apartment building, and my neighbor, and let's stipulate, my neighbor is a client of your department of DHS, and is having problems, and those problems are spilling over, screaming in the hallway, screaming in the apartment, and keeping me awake at night, and so on and so forth. If I understand Mr. Ross's answer to Commissioner Slatnick, my my recourse is not to go to DHS and say, who the hell is this person's case manager? Can we get that person on the job? No, my conduit is to go to the management of the building. Now, let me just ask, does the law impose requirements on management to go to you? You said, Mr. Ross, that the management knows who the caseworker is or knows who the contact at DHS is. Is there some requirement on management that they take the news that I've just brought to them and get it to your department?
So,
Excuse me, can you just take the slide down? I asked this before.
Sorry, I was trying to text. Tyler, would you mind stop screen sharing, please? Thank you.
Mr. Ross or Ms. Holland?
yes, sir. So, yes, if someone living in an apartment building is playing their music after hours, the expectation is they're calling the landlord just in any situation when someone is breaking the tenets of the lease. What I said earlier is if you are calling a couple of times and it's still an issue, then I want you to call me so that you're not continuing to make those calls unanswered.
But so I understand it. Is there a requirement under the law that management let you know when I've complained to them about somebody, and we're stipulating here, it's your client. Is there a requirement? Is there any requirement on management to do anything with regard to letting you know that one of your clients, who's my neighbor, is acting out?
So I know there's a requirement as a management agency to take action just because they're a resident complaining. Ms. Holland, is there anything in the paperwork that mandates the manager to contact DHS?
Yeah, that's
No, it is not a part of the law that they have to do that. However, all the residents in those buildings are their tenants, and it would not behoove them to ignore your concerns any more than they should ignore any other's concerns. And so when they know that this is a participant in our program, oftentimes we get a call from that landlord to say, hey, we have someone in apartment 3A that has had noise complaints on them, and we have reached out, talked to them. It has still continued to happen. And so even with the first concern, we increase our contacts with them. We talk about other resources and things in the community, working with DBH, getting mental health or substance abuse or domestic violence workers involved. And so we immediately go into, yes, I'm sorry.
Let me just ask, within the limits of the law as it now is there a way that DHS, again, we're stipulating that the person is your client and is in this building as my neighbor, on some sort of system that you administer. Within the law as it now exists, can you impose a requirement? I mean, whatever behooves management. I think many of the people on this call would say management doesn't do what behooves them, what it should behoove them to do. Is there any ability on your part within the limits of the law as it now is to say, you manager have got to call me when you get a complaint about one of my clients? Mr. Ross or Ms. Holland?
So whenever we are working with our participants in our tenant base, so let me switch. In our unit base, where you saw the scattered, the limited, the site base, there is an agreement that we have because those units are attached to the property, and they are not attached to the unit. So those property managers, those developers, they absolutely have that as a part of their agreement with DHCD and DHS. that yes, they do. With the tenant base, we build rapport with those landlords. And oftentimes, because they are getting complaints from other tenants, other market rate tenants, they do reach out to us. And as Mr. Ross said earlier, unfortunately, many of those folks are not connected to DHS. When we drill down and we look at those names, most of them are not connected to DHS. But the ones that are connected, we are very much engaged. Very much engaged.
If I understand what the both of you have said, the bulk of the tenants who are connected to DHS are tenant-based and not site-based. And so you don't really now have a requirement on the management of buildings to pass along to you complaints about your clients. I think I understand. You say you work closely, and Mr. Ross says he wants to get the call, but that's all. I mean, Mr. Ross's solution is kind of informal. I mean, the question is there a formal requirement on management to let you know? So I just asked that question. Let me just pursue the other thing I want to say.
Well, let me respond then. I mean, you asked the question, that the answer is no, because at that point for tenant base, the lease is in the resident's name. So while we want to have a relationship, we can contact the resident. That's why we're suggesting that we want you to call the landlord and let us know so we too can have that conversation. The landlord, it makes business sense for you to do something here. And from an agency, we're creating a situation with the community that doesn't have to be that way. So is there a mandate? No, but is there a want to intervene? Yes, there is.
No, there isn't. I mean,
I said yes, there is. There is a want to intervene. That's why I'm saying get me involved so I can intervene.
Okay, let me try the one other question I have.
Okay.
I think the bulk of
We are going to need to move on. So just
okay.
quickly,
All
please.
right, I just want to, I think the bulk of the vouchers we're talking about are the housing choice vouchers that the Housing Authority administers. Let's say I am a voucher tenant under the Housing Authority and I want services. If I understand Mr. Ross correctly, I can get them if I come to you and ask for them as a resident and of the city. Is that correct?
If you ask for homeless services,
Not homeless services. I mean, I've got a crazy kid. And they're disrupting the building and they're disrupting my life, and I need help. But I'm not under a DHS program. I have a housing choice voucher. Can I get services from DHS or from DHS?
so for that, can we serve as a case manager to address your specific issue for your calling? No, because they're a resident of the District of Columbia, we would call and offer connection to the services that we can. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll recede. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I want to just try and get to a couple more people. I know DHS needs to go, but so if everyone can just do quickly, George Hoffman. Up, you're muted.
Got it.
Okay.
Just apropos of that discussion, we do not have a full-time resident manager. And that is the case, as I understand it, in a lot of buildings. So communicating with management is not as simple or as immediate as one might think. Mainly, I want to comment and build on what Councilmember Fruman addressed and what Commissioner Hewitt said. There needs to be the bigger picture addressed. And I think we're talking about working on a plan. And in my building, the Brandywine, some of us have been working on this for 5, 6, 7, going on 8 years. We have looked at this from many, many, many angles and lived through many, many episodes and many, many situations. One of our conclusions is that it would do very well for all city agencies to look and work more closely with the nonprofits like Miriam's Kitchen, who do a fantastic job of vetting that is way more complex and yet not intrusive than what apparently is required now to get a voucher. And I want to say peripherally that I was once years ago temporarily on disability. I understood that I would have to answer many questions and had to be re-examined periodically. When you get help, you have to abide by the rules of such help. And leaving situations as a consequence of the present setup in the hands of people who are barely able to manage everyday decisions to decide whether they need they want to see their social worker is borderline absurd. So I think you really have to address a fundamental change in that process. As to plans, you talk about Ms. Holland and Mr. Ross, you talk about the law. I understand that the law limits you, but what we're asking maybe is for a broader discussion that goes beyond the law, in which you as professionals are involved. And I would say that you could propose, for example, a very fast 6-month or 1-year interventional training of professionals supervised by staff. You have many people who are in graduate school, who are retired social workers, who could be in such a program. And I think that another aspect of this is that agencies should be working with our universities. Here we have 3, 4, 5 outstanding universities with students who could be trained. We should be working with them immediately on looking at city problems and addressing how can they participate? How could they be part of training people?
George, thanks. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
yeah, I'm just saying that it is possible to do these things. Thank you.
So in response, Miriam's Kitchen is part of our coordinated entry process that Ms. Holland spoke about, and that's part of the providers that help us identify residents who are prepared for this program to go in and become your neighbor. So we do work with them very closely. They're part of our outreach team as well. And again, I would go back to what I shared with the council member. Our job is to operate programs within the rule of law, and a lot of what we're talking about tonight, no, I do not disagree with you, but for us to say, yes, we will do what you're asking of us would be a clear violation of the law. And while that may make some people on this call happy, we then spend 10 months dealing with legal aid in the courts tied up in how we broke the law and violated someone's rights. So again, I want to reiterate, we are not here to point fingers and not say what we can't do, but what we also cannot do is to engage in conversations where we would be breaking them.
Thank you. We're going to go to Danny Hickson. I think you, the DHS team has time for just a couple more questions. They're staying over.
I
Danny.
think that was the first question, and this is the second.
Okay.
Yes, my question is first, well, one thing is if the ANC does this again, I think you need to have multiple agencies on here because otherwise you get, I call it the DC salute. It's their problem. So housing should be on here, behavioral health should be on here. Everybody who touches this issue should be on the call. So that you don't have that problem of, it's another agency. All the agencies are here to answer. The other my other thing is, I think the council member said that there's a dashboard somewhere where we can tell like what percentage of the vouchers up here are administered by housing authority versus DHS. Is that correct? And if so, can somebody tell me where that is? The other thing is kind of piggybacking on what the council member said and what several other people have asked, directed toward Mr. Ross and his colleague is, you continue to say within the law, but the law does not prevent you from managing your programs. So there's nothing, I think the feeling here is there could be more done by the agency to hold accountable. Like, what do you have in place to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing? You say they're supposed to get this, and this, but what's being done to ensure that that's actually occurring, to make sure that your outreach workers are making contact, that the case managers are doing what they're supposed to do, that nonprofits are fulfilling their obligations, and then you said if somebody supports services, you can't just throw up your hands, because you can continue to go back to people and continue to offer them services. And I would like to think that if you're getting called every week about one of your constituents and they've refused services, I would think you would be on the phone to that person running, overseeing that person and say, hey, you need to get back up there. Let's continue to talk to this person. Let's constantly engage with them. And what we as
yeah, I'm going to let him answer that, but I'll also speak to the fact that the three ANC agencies on the call have called for a joint oversight meeting, which would put all of the people in the room.
Okay, great. But now I lost my train of thought.
I think we got your train of thought very well. Thank you very much.
And we'll be open to coming back to any additional meeting where our colleagues are at. And just to Mr. Hobson said that if and when we get calls, and he would be going back out to follow up on those customers. We do that, Mr. Hobson, all the time, not just when calls happen. We have routine outreach schedules and routes where we do follow up with those participants and residents who have opted out of case management. We don't just allow that to happen and just walk away. There are continuous attempts to engage and re-engage.
Covis.
Hello. I have a couple of questions. One, I'd like to know, I know you mentioned the Virginia Williams Center. Does the Virginia Williams Center require that you have an eviction in order for them to provide financial assistance?
No, ma'am, that's a great question. So the portal is open throughout the year. However, as soon as we open it, those applications are gone really quick. And so sometimes we cannot get to them at the same time where the court has pulled someone's case for court. And so what we tell residents is after they have applied, if we have not reached out to them and they are served with an eviction, if they have applied for ERAP assistance, they can send us that writ and we can reach out to the court to say there is an active ERAP, and they'll at least delay it until we make that determination.
Okay. Can you tell me, I know you said that there are about 10,000 people that are, or I guess belong to the DHS portion of the system. I've received rapid rehousing, and every letter that I get says that I'm required to comply. So I'm a little confused. I didn't realize that I had the option to continue or discontinue services at my own will. I have documents that I was forced to sign that say quite the opposite, that I won't get my services. As a reminder, I must comply. So can you speak to that?
So is that the
Well,
rapid? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So rapid rehousing is one of our temporary programs. And what we're speaking of is the permanent supportive housing, which are the voucher programs. So the rapid rehousing is different. That is a subsidy program. It is a short-term subsidy program. It's
Can
different.
you tell us about from a percentage wise? I know that you said you have PSH and you've got rapid rehousing. About how many people are on rapid rehousing that are in this Connecticut Avenue corridor? Is that a number that you all have?
I don't have that information.
And then someone mentioned something as regards to the PSH program. I know you said it happens rather quickly. Can you tell me like how quickly? What's quickly?
So when you said happens, what are you specifically
So let's
speaking
say
of?
someone
Getting them
comes in and they're on
housed?
rapid rehousing, and then they've been recommended for permanent supportive housing. How long is a reasonable amount of time to sit on that system or have to go through the process, provided you have, like he said, your ID, all of your paperwork, because clearly you'd have all of your paperwork in order to be on the rapid rehousing system, because you had to have your birth certificates, all your document, you had to already have all of that in order to get on rapid rehousing and get placed. So then to move to PSH, theoretically, you've had all those documents. How long does it take if you have all your documents?
So that's a very loaded question, because it depends on you. It depends on your specific circumstance. It depends on what unit you chose. It depends on if that unit is available. So there are a lot of it depends that I would have to.
I'm not talking
have-
about to get, I'm not talking about to receive a unit. I'm talking about just to move to be approved for PSH. I believe that.
So that goes through the CAP process, right? And so to be matched to PSH is one thing. To get assigned to a provider of your choice, you would have to go through intake, where you would choose your provider and choose the goals that you would want to work on over the next year. And so being matched through CAP is one thing. Being assigned, you would have to complete the intake process. Okay. And that is a fairly short period of time if we can locate the person.
Right. What's fairly short?
2 days,
month, a
3 days.
year?
It really, no, ma'am. No, ma'am, not a year. No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I received the rapid rehousing program. It's October 28th. It's been over a year. I've had multiple vendors, and I can't imagine, like I said, the people, my neighbors, and how much they've gone through the same system, just being switched around. And as many of the people on the ANC have stated, the process is so convoluted, it's so difficult to navigate. And it appears, I understand where you all are coming from, and you're saying the majority of these people are not DHS's responsibility. The 20,000 are coming from voucher holders or Section 8. However, like, as a person who's on that same system, I know the struggle is real, and I don't know who needs to speak with who, but I'd be more than happy to have a conversation. But it's difficult, and I can only imagine how much people who may not know to get on an ANC call, how much trouble they may have. And do you all have any, I mean, just as far as like the communication between the clients and yourselves, and they pick their own vendor, do y'all send out a list of who the vendor options are so that we can look them up and make an educated decision?
So I'm not speaking speaking regarding rapid rehousing, but as far as permanent supportive housing, when you're contacted by the intake worker, any provider who has capacity at that time, you are offered them, and they will go through all of the services. but we have 23 providers. And at any given time, they do not all have capacity. And so at the times that people go through intake, they are given a list of those who have capacity and what are the special services that those agencies provide, which may be external of PSH.
Thank you. I urge everybody on this call to dig into the numbers as far as who's on, how many people are on rapid rehousing versus how many people are on PSH, because that's important. Yeah, I think it makes a difference in even having this conversation.
Thanks, Kobe's, for participating. Harry? You're muted.
Yeah, I think she's making a good point about statistics and transparency. And I also take Danny Hickson's point about getting everyone in the room, the various agencies. And Courtney, I know that you've been trying to do that, but it's hard to have this conversation only hearing part of the story. And this is like a third of the total volume of vouchers that we're talking about with DHS. And there are many more in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. But what I'd like to know specifically as far as Connecticut Avenue goes, and particularly since you have the different ANCs here represented, how has it happened that such an extremely large number of people have fallen into the Woodley Park, Cleveland Park, Van Ness, Forest Hills, up to Chevy Chase stretch of Connecticut Avenue? And in certain buildings, starting with Sedgwick Gardens, Parkway, Park West, Rodman, 3003 Van Ness, Connecticut House, Saratoga, Chesapeake, Kenmore, 4000 Masses on Mass Ave, and other buildings. These certain buildings have extremely large numbers of voucher recipients, most of whom have exited homelessness. And those buildings are the same ones that have had these problems. Now, of course, I've said many times that if you're a voucher recipient, doesn't make you a problem causer necessarily, but there have been a lot of problems in those buildings. I heard from Ms. Holland about the site-based programs. And so what I'd like to know is, are these buildings site-based? Is that why we have such an extremely large 30% to 50%?
None of them are. None of them are, sir.
So then how has that happened then? Is it a city coordinated program? How is it that this stretch, this neighborhood, these buildings specifically have been partly converted into quasi-public housing for people who've experienced homelessness? Because part of the problem here, I think, is density. It's just that it's very hard for a community to absorb 90 people who come from extreme difficulty. And particularly if they're not associated with your programs and are getting no help. Because I think that's what you're seeing in some buildings, an extremely large number of people, and they have no help. How has that happened?
So the way that happens from our perspective, and I can't speak for everyone, but from our perspective, the landlords state that they have units that are available, and the landlords are willing to rent those units to them and receive their subsidy. The participants choose their units. There are no site base in any of those buildings. So they are choosing those, and the landlords are accepting them because they have availability, they have openings.
So you say there's no coordination with the city, that people kind of randomly show up, and of a building with 300 units, 150 descend with vouchers and want to rent in those buildings. Is that what happens?
All of our participants have the choice. There is no coordinated effort for us to say, go here, these are units for you. They do their research, they find open units, and those landlords take those application fees, holding fees, amenities fees, all of those things, and they approve them to go into the unit. And because they're rent reasonable and their income makes it affordability, they can then move forward with leasing up in those units that they choose.
Well, that doesn't seem likely to me, honestly. Even if maybe it doesn't happen with DHS vouchers, I don't know. But people just serendipitously landing in certain buildings is extremely unlikely. But the second part of the problem is if that's happening, then how do you take steps so those buildings that are very burdened then have some assistance so they don't just fall apart? And in certain buildings, they are stretched because of the problems that they've seen. So what steps can the city take, and not just DHS, but the city generally, to address this issue? Because housing vouchers are supposed to deconcentrate poverty. And that's what makes it work well. If it's working well, is help people be absorbed into much larger communities. In this case, is taking people and concentrating them in certain buildings. And it does seem to be directed, honestly. But however it happens, I think that the other people on this call who are in some of those buildings will agree that having a very large number of people who have come from struggle and who are not getting sufficient help creates a problem for everyone. And so far, I don't hear anybody in the city saying, oh yeah, well, we know how that happened. That there's just shaking of heads. No, it's impossible. It just happened randomly. But I don't think that's likely. And I'd like to hear the whole story. And maybe we just need to get everyone together in the room so they can tell the story. But as long as we don't know how that's happened, what kind of help people need on the ground, we're just making up stuff. And anybody watching this call might think that there's a handful of people and a handful of problems. But as someone was pointing out, in all these buildings that are affected, you're getting police calls all the time. Police is descending all the time on the buildings. In our building, it's at least one a day. And it's up and down Connecticut Avenue. It's really, really been affected. And I think the concentration of people who are struggling without help is something that needs to be addressed directly. Thank you.
Okay, does the team, so I think the DHS team had agreed to be here until 8:30, and they have stayed past their time to hear out the rest. Can you speak to that, and then that'll be our last bit?
I'm not sure I can speak to it. We've said we don't place resident. Mr. Garal does not believe that. And the only thing I can leave you with is the residents who we serve want to live in resource-rich areas too. And a lot of the communities they have come from in DC are not resource-rich, and that's naturally where folks flock to. I'm a resident, a homeowner in Ward 7. There's probably one grocery store, and I own a car. And so it's not inconceivable for folks with families with multiple needs to want to live somewhere where there's grocery stores and church and faith and hospital and things within walking nature. So
David, that's still, I still don't buy that. We're talking about certain
question. We do not guide
certain
residents to units. We've answered the question.
Okay, so we'll leave that there. Thank you. And we're having these three ANCs have requested an oversight meeting, so that I'm sorry, an oversight hearing, so that we can bring a lot of different people to the table again to be able to speak to these issues that DHS doesn't or can't. So thank you very much, and thank you. We really appreciate.
That's not fair, Courtney. We agreed to be here till 8:30, so it's not that we.
No, I just already said that.
Okay.
I already said that. I'm sorry. I'm just reiterating. I'm reiterating that the three ANCs involved have requested a council joint oversight hearing so that we may bring more people than just you who have spent your evening with us, which we are grateful for. Thank you very much. I think your presentation was very helpful. Ms. Holland, we really appreciate your answers, both of you. So, you've done the extent of what you can do. And like it's an elephant, we're taking one bite at a time. We're trying to do what we can do to get answers, to get safety for people who don't feel safe in their homes. Every person, no matter how they pay their rent, deserves to feel safe in their home, and that is a city's fundamental right to its residents.
Agreed.
So that is all we are doing here, is trying to have that be heard and trying to get to the next step. You have come We are grateful for your answers. We are grateful for your participation. Thank you very much for being here. And we will, from here, take the next step. So I wasn't trying to be unfair to you. I apologize if you felt that way. Thank you guys so much for coming, and we will look forward to hopefully speaking with you again in the future, and we'll continue to get the next couple questions while Councilmember Furman is still here. Thank you for staying past the time you agreed. We're grateful for that. Thank you. Karen.
I'm
Karen?
unmuted, right? I think so.
Yes, you are.
I wish David Ross would give his contact information. I heard him say several times that if people are having trouble over and over that is not being resolved regarding voucher holders in the DHS program, people are free to contact him. Michael Baer directly addressed David Ross, asking him to put his contact information in the chat.
Karen, we have his contact information. I'm happy to give you his email.
Yes, that would be good.
Okay,
And
great.
I'm not done talking. I want to mention, and I'm sorry to say this.
Karen, you're out of order. Please don't do that. If you'd like to ask, okay, just please. Okay.
I haven't finished. Is it possible for me to finish?
You have 1 minute. It's 8:57.
Okay,
There's
well,
another person who would also like to speak who hasn't spoken before.
I'll say just very quickly, Miriam's Kitchen's caseworkers who field most of the area up and down Connecticut Avenue do not come. They are the ones who do not come. Their caseworkers do not come. And the third point is voucher holders are being bused to our buildings by the city. And that's one way that so many have ended up in our buildings. I know that personally from voucher holders in my building, Sedgwick Gardens. They were bused here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth McPike, and this is the last question. I think, Elizabeth?
Thank you. Well, if Ms. Holland is still here, yes. I wonder if you could explain the I'm losing words here. The screening process that you have. Because I guess it's mainly from reading articles in the Post that my understanding is that there's very little screening, or the screening is very light. And if that's so, it strikes me as unfair to put so much burden on the landlords to address some of the problems as they arise, if it's true that the landlords are not allowed to do the typical screening that they would have done with non-voucher holders.
So I hear a few different things. Yes, there are particular criteria that landlords cannot defy the law regarding homeless or previously homeless residents, right? Around income and eviction and evictions on their record or credit checks and different things like that. As far as folks getting into our program, they have to do an assessment, a homeless assessment called a SPDAT, and then they have to go through a process, the Coordinated Assessment and Placement Unit, that is governed through the community partnership. And they are then prioritized because there are not nearly enough vouchers for everyone who would need one. They have to be prioritized, and it really goes on length of chronicity of the chronicity of homelessness and the disabling condition. And so then those people are prioritized depending on those criteria. And so those the CAP criteria, the coordinated assessment and housing placement criteria, you can get through our website or through the ICH as well.
I'm sorry, I probably wasn't clear. I meant, how do you screen people in terms of background questions, in terms of eviction, criminal records, whatever? I have no idea, but I'm asking you.
So I think what you're asking me is about the criteria for landlords. So there are tenant advocacy groups, and there
No,
are.
I was asking about what screening your agency does for voucher holders.
So all of those go through the coordinated assessment and housing placement. So they're matched to PSH through the CAP process. They're prioritized regarding the chronicity of homelessness and their disabling condition. And then they are the ones that make the decision. That community of advocates, that community of residents, that community of providers, they then make those decisions to prioritize who is matched to one of the voucher programs at DHS. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much for staying on and for taking that. I really appreciate that. And if you could send along the presentation, it's possible to email that presentation to us. I think that would be really helpful to look at some of the things you've put out there.
Courtney, can I just chime in for 1 second?
Please, yes, can you could bring us home, please.
So, I mean, part of it, to Elizabeth's question about to what extent are those kinds of things used for screening criminal background checks, that's prohibited under the law. So it's not Ms. Holland that does that. And Mr. Ross spoke to this before, that part of the theory behind Housing First was you really got to get a roof over people's heads in order for them to get on their feet, and that housing is a form of health. And so the law has been structured so that there isn't that sort of screening. And part of the challenge is, and as I was talking about it before, is, okay, well, that can be the law, but then what happens in terms of supporting people, and what happens in terms of where people create issues? And it's a minority of the folks who create issues. What do we do in that setting? And that's part of the challenge that we're all grappling with. To some extent, on this whole placement thing, I think as I said before, Director Pettigrew at the most recent hearing talked about how they were going to do better at placing people because they'd hired more locators, and the locators' jobs are to find where there are available units and then to put those options in front of potential voucher holders. That's all a very healthy thing. And what Mr. Ross described was, well, you know, if that's one of the options, if there's a bus and the bus takes people to 10 buildings all around the city, and there's somebody who's lived in an amenity desert, and an apartment on Connecticut Avenue looks very attractive because there are so many amenities around them, you know, that's the way it all fits together. I think it gets to be semantics. So, I mean, it's not that the city government is completely hands off, but it's also not that the city government says, hey, Joe, you go here. It's that they try as best they can to present options to folks, and then those people choose the options that they seek. I think everybody is ground down by this discussion today. It is a very difficult discussion. I started by saying, when people ask me what's the hardest thing that is about this job, it's trying to grapple with this. People, you know, I got frustrated tonight. I'm not sure that was the most productive thing, but I did, and I expressed that frustration. This is really hard. The laws with the best of intentions, have created dynamics that I think are not perfect. And we gotta figure out how to turn the dials and how to provide the kinds of supports so that we are successfully doing this. There's been a fair amount of focus, and there was not that somebody raised that, I guess Karen raised the idea about one of the service providers not being very good. I don't know about that service provider, but what I do know is there are dozens of service providers, and some of them are excellent and some of them are not. And that's another piece of this puzzle. So fundamentally, I think this has been a very healthy discussion. This is a really challenging, knotty problem, and I don't want to prolong the exhausting night with more on it, but thank you very much for bringing people together and trying to have as constructive of a discussion of it as we can.
You're muted. Courtney, you're muted.
Sorry, my dog was barking. I forgot. I want to just thank you so much, everyone, for being here and participating in the discussion, especially 3, 4G and 3C. This is not the end of this discussion. We will keep the community informed of what we hear on our request for the Joint Oversight Committee Council hearing, which I think will be the best next step that we have any ability to take. And please continue to communicate with us. Let us know your experiences, your questions, and we will try and get them passed along as best we can.
Courtney, please put David Ross's contact info
I'll send it to, okay, I'll send it to you.
in the chat for everybody.
It was on the slide.
I will.
The slide was tiny writing. I could not pick it out. Sorry.
I will send it to you.
Don't send it to me, Courtney. Everybody should get it.
Excuse me. It's right there in the chat.
It's David Ross, david.ross@dc.gov.
David.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Good night.
Wait, Courtney,
Yes.
please hold ANC3F people so we can vote on that one little piece of thing that I need, please.
Okay, everyone except for commissioners of ANC3F, you're free to go about your evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We really appreciate the discussion.
Great job. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Okay, through ANC3F commissioners, we need to vote on acceptance of the QFR Q3 2024 report. Inadvertently, it was left off some minutes, and we need to throw that vote and that approval into these minutes, or else I can't be timely with our submission to the ANC office. So I move that we accept the QFR Q3 2024 report that was filed several months ago.
I second.
second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Rachel, please make sure that that's in part of the minutes tonight. And as I've mentioned to you, Rachel and Terry and Courtney, if you can, I need a draft of those minutes tonight, even if they're very rough, but I do, not tonight, I need them this week because I need to have them to submit with the QFR materials for that quarter and for quarter number 4.
Okay,
Thank
this
you.
is Rachel. I'll make sure you get them in the next day or two.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Rachel.
I'm so sorry,
welcome.
Mitchell. I was a little bit thrown, I think, at the end by getting barked at by Karen. So I forgot that you needed me.
Courtney,
Understandable.
Courtney, to the group and to anyone else listening, you did an excellent job tonight.
Yeah.
And you should be very, very happy with how things proceeded. It went long, but you knew it was going to. But I, for one, admire what you did tonight, and you did an excellent convening of the meeting. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I second that.
So much. And Terry, I thought your comments were excellent. I thought
Oh, absolutely.
did,
Thank you.
did
You
great
stood
stuff.
up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody. And we'll just keep on keeping on, huh?
Sounds good. Have a great night.
Thank you.
guys.
Thanks everybody. Thank you, Mitchell. Bye.